out to record a gig. We were all except John Sykes, we were all very ill. And we just sort of, we'd started the tour, and we hadn't kind of learned to pace ourselves, really. I mean, when we toured at that point, there was a lot of partying and everything, And so we all got really ill. We got a really bad flu. But we did the gig, and, when you're on stage, the adrenaline takes over and you feel okay. When you get off stage again, we felt terrible. I mean, we were dying in the dressing room. And sort of half an hour later, John Sykes comes in and says, I've listened back to the stuff we've recorded, and it's unusable. And strangely, it was never mentioned again, It was just like, oh, okay. And I think we just felt so awful anyway that we just didn't give it any more thought. And it was really a bizarre thing because, I mean, a lot of live albums aren't really even live, They're either repaired in the studio to the point where, I know of at least one live album that was recorded entirely in the studio. And so, why it was just kind of abandoned. And I never heard it, until it actually was released on an album 20 years later. I'd never heard it. And it was, when it did come out, you could see, in fact, actually, it was more than usable. It was perfectly fine. And, if there had been anything wrong with it, it would have been an easy thing to put right. I think probably John had just heard a bad note or something, and, being a bit of a perfectionist, he probably thought, this is no good. So as a result of not putting out the live album, we were sort of had to record Crazy Nights way before we were ready. And it was, that was the reason there's some good stuff on it. It's kind of half of a good album, really, but in terms of the sort of organization of it and putting it together, it was a shambles. And because of that, we didn't want to repeat that when we came to do The Cage. And so we got a pop producer in, really. I mean, he's sort of a rock producer these days, but we were the first rock band he'd ever done. And, because we didn't want a repetition of the same sort of craziness that went on at Crazy Nights. We were ready to sort of really try and work hard and, put a professional sort of operation together. And so, that though all of those things were kind of crucial developments in the band, but none of them were deliberate. I don't really think. Another example would be when we got John Sykes in the band. I mean, we put an advert in. I can't remember where, but advertised for a guitar player. And of course, when you've got a record deal, everybody wants to play in your band, and so all of these really good guitar players turned up. And, didn't really occur to us not to just pick the best guy, and John Sykes was the best guy. But of course, it radically changed the band. If we'd kind of known how it would change the band, who knows, maybe we wouldn't have even picked him, I don't know, because we weren't looking to do that, it was, what we were actually looking to do was just sort of fill out the sound, because Wildcat was recorded, with two guitars, so Rob did rhythm and lead, so, when it came to touring it, we really needed two guitars, so that was what we got another guitar player in. We didn't really think in terms of getting in a world-class lead guitar player. But that's what we got, and it did sort of change the sound of the band. These things, I don't think you really necessarily, they're not necessarily mistakes. But, they things happen that are not really within your control. And, it's...
So if we can look at some of this stuff, then Wildcats. I'm gonna go back in time. So Wildcats comes out, and it has sort of a modicum of success. It creates a fan base, but the media, from what I've researched all the different reviews, they took a lot of shots at the vocals. They said, oh well, the vocals. So you get John Deverell in for Spellbound. Where was that decision made? Is that, the story that's out in the public is that Jess quit. did he quit? Was the record company saying, hey, you need a more radio-friendly voice? Where does that decision come in?
Well, the record company weren't even involved. I mean,
Okay.
we didn't used to discuss anything with them. We were, they were the principal sort of object of our derision, really. So we never talked to them about these decisions. I mean, we didn't talk to them about the decision of getting John Sykes in either. I mean, they were horrified. They didn't like the idea of having two guitars. They liked it when they heard it, but they didn't like the idea of it. And we didn't discuss anything to do with vocalists. I mean, it was, as I say, getting John Sykes in the band radically changed the sound of the band. I mean, we became a much more conventional sounding band. I mean, the sort of limitations we'd worked with in the sort of Wildcat era was, led to something that was unusual and that didn't really sound like anybody else. But, with two guitars, and especially with sort of John Sykes' abilities, it was a more conventional band. It was a more conventional sound. I mean, a better band in most ways, I guess, but it was definitely, a more sort of mainstream kind of sound. And I think really it kind of didn't suit Jess, really. It didn't suit his voice. If you listen to Spellbound, it would be hard to imagine, really, Jess singing Mirror or something like that, But, I mean, now I think it would have been interesting to have done an album with John Sykes and with Jess. I think it would have been an interesting thing, but, it wasn't to be. I think, I mean, that was it. It was really getting John Sykes in the band. It was the catalyst, really, for that change, I would say.
Looking back at John Sykes, because, he is, now 2016, 2017 here, we considered to be one of these great guitarists, revered, the stuff with Thin Lizzy and Whitesnake. Was he just the wrong guy for the band? Because he sort of did up the sound and up the guitars, and was he maybe just not the right piece of the puzzle?
Oh no! I mean, I think we were delighted with the Spellbound sound. I mean,
yeah, it's a great album.
What I mean is, we hadn't really been intending to do that. Getting John Sykes in wasn't in order to change the sound in that direction. We never thought about what direction we were going in. I mean, there was no thought of that at all. It was just, we had all of these great guitar players auditioning, and he was the best, and so we picked him. And so then suddenly you find yourself in a band with, there's five of you, and one is able to play world-class lead guitar, and that pulls you in a certain direction. It's not a kind of deliberate thing, but I think, I mean, when we got John Deverell in the band, which again, I mean, we auditioned for a singer, and we didn't have in mind any particular kind of singer. We weren't thinking, do we want somebody with a soul sort of voice, or do we want somebody with an operatic voice or anything? We just auditioned, and he was the best singer, and so he got the job. We weren't really kind of thinking about. One thing about the Tygers is it's never had a kind of guiding sort of influence the way Maiden has. I mean, Steve Harris decides how Maiden sounds, and so Maiden has sounded fairly much the same throughout its life, because it's got that sort, he is in charge, it's his band, and he decides how it's going to sound, whereas the Tygers never had that. We were always, everybody was equal, everybody had equal say, and, really just whatever came out, came out. So when we got John Deverell in and we did the demos for Spellbound, I mean, I was amazed. I mean, I got home from the studio doing the demo recording, put the recordings on, and I just couldn't believe how amazing it was. For me, it was like, wow, I can't believe I'm in this band. It was great. So, there was no regrets at that point, because it just seemed like, and I think for most people, I suppose there's two classic Tygers albums, and one is Wildcat and one is Spellbound, and they're very different. But I suppose both of those versions of the band are sort of classic versions, really.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
I was just going to say 4 albums in 2 years.
Yeah.
Was that record company saying, "Hey, let's get some product out there," or were you guys just so eager to get going that you wanted to create? Because you look at it now, 4 albums is, for any band now, is a decade, right?
No, absolutely. Yeah, no, it was madness. I mean, Wildcat and Spellbound happened fairly quickly in a fairly natural way. And as I say, we were supposed to fill the gap after Spellbound with a live album, and that was going to give us time to work on a third album. But because that didn't happen, we were doing Crazy Nights. So the record company, they were mad for, they were always saying, "Oh, can you do another album?" And it was like, we were always dependent on finance from them, and it always seemed to be dependent on another album coming out. So yeah, that was we certainly weren't ready for Crazy Nights, and we weren't happy about having to do it when we did, because we hadn't written much. It was, and the way it was recorded, because we hadn't really written it. And the producer, is that we got the wrong producer, really, I guess, was part of the problem. I mean, that was a wrong decision. But the way he liked to work was he liked to record the bass and drums at the beginning, and then add the guitars, and then add the vocals. And so, because the songs hadn't been really written, Brian and I were playing the bass and drums to songs that we'd never heard. It's kind of like a bizarre way of doing it. We'd never heard these songs as songs, because they didn't have any vocals, they didn't have any words. I think maybe a couple of them did, but a lot of them were just sort of, it was just, there was a guide guitar, but Brian and I were kind of playing the bass and drums to songs we'd never heard, which was kind of bizarre, really. So, if we'd had a chance, we never demoed that album. I mean, the others we demoed, but that one we never demoed, and we were straight in the studio, and and it was pretty shambolic, really. The other thing was we were just, we were partying pretty hard at that point, and I think we'd kind of taken our eye off the ball, really, as far as what really is important in being a band, and we were treating what are the sort of ancillary things as being what it was all about. And that's kind of what we tried to put right on the Cage, really, was, I think we'd all realised that that kind of stuff can't go on. And I mean, we thought it was hilarious to kind of, to get the producer drunk, He'd get so drunk we'd have to send him home in a taxi, and then we couldn't record anything for the rest of the session, It was just sort of ridiculous things like that, absolutely crazy behaviour, really. But, we weren't really ready to do it. It was just, the whole thing was just shambolic. And we were very disappointed with the result, really.
Yeah, so I've got a whole bunch of questions here. So, first of all, the sound from Wildcat all the way to the Cage varies differently. Like I said, one is more sort of that punk ethos, which is Wildcat, and by the time you get to the Cage, it really almost sounds like sort of a rocked out Duran Duran in a sense. And I don't mean that to be offensive. I like the Cage. I happen to actually enjoy that album, but if you think back to 1983, 1984, or in fact this was 82, it sort of seems to be following along that, the Knack and sort of those more glitz, fun rock, if you want. Was that sound a mistake for the band? Because did it, in one sense, it reaches radio, but on the other hand, it sort of alienates the metal fans, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was watching an interview with James Hetfield, and he was talking about when they did Load, and he said, we got arrested by the heavy metal police for not being heavy metal enough, and that's kind of like, it's a bit like that, but of course we actually